Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our VulnHub walkthrough series. In today's video, we'll continue exploring the exciting VulnHub collection with Symfonos. Specifically, we're diving into the fifth virtual machine in the series, Symfonos 5. This intermediate OSCP-like real-world scenario machine is designed to highlight the importance of understanding vulnerabilities and how to exploit them effectively. Let's get started. To begin, head over to the VulnHub website and download the machine's image file. If you're new to VulnHub, make sure to check out our playlist for helpful guides on how to use the platform. Now, let's get started with exploiting this machine. Setting up. Previously, we've downloaded all 6 image files. Now, our next step is to set up the virtual image in VirtualBox. The downloaded image file is in the form of a 7-zip archive, so start by extracting it to access the files within. Inside the extracted folder, you'll find several files, including the essential VMDK files. Next, let's create a new virtual machine in VirtualBox. Click New to create a new VM. Name it Symfonos 5. Set the OS type to Linux, and choose Other Linux 64-bit for the version, since the specific distribution is unknown. Allocate the desired amount of RAM. Then select Use an existing virtual hard disk file and locate the VMDK file you just extracted. Click Finish to complete the setup. Once finished, you'll see the Symfonos 5 vulnerable machine listed in the VirtualBox Manager. For better organization, I'll regroup it into the VulnHub group. Now, to ensure both your Kali Linux machine, used for attacks, and the vulnerable machine are connected to the same network, we need to configure the network adapter to host only. Go to Settings, navigate to the Network section, and change the adapter type to host only adapter. Since everything is ready, let's attempt to start the VM to check if it works. Once it boots up, you should see a login prompt, indicating that everything is set up and we can begin our exploration. Finally, our vulnerable machine is ready with the login prompt displayed. Now we're ready to begin our exploration. Start by launching your attacking machine. In my case, I'll be using Kali Linux. Once Kali is up and running, we're all set to dive into the fun and begin the process of uncovering vulnerabilities, exploiting the target, and gaining access. Let's get started. Enumeration. The first step in our attack is enumeration, where we identify the IP address of our target machine using the NetDiscover tool. This step helps map the network and locate devices that are up and accessible. To execute this, open a terminal and enter netdiscover-I, then specify the network interface to use for scanning, which in this case is EF1. The command output displays a list of devices detected on the network, showing their IP and MAC addresses, as well as the associated vendor. Our target machine's IP address is identified as 192.168.103.17. Next, we'll perform a network scan to identify open ports on the target, which is a critical part of the enumeration process. Identifying open ports provides insights into the network's attack surface, helping us pinpoint services that may be vulnerable to exploitation. For this task, we'll use the popular network scanning tool, Nmap. To execute the scan on the terminal, run nmap-s-C-S-V, then specify the target IP address. In this command, -S-C initiates a script scan using Nmap's default scripts, which gather additional information about each service and identify possible vulnerabilities. -S-V enables version detection to determine the version of services running on open ports. After completing the scan, the results reveal 4 open ports along with their respective services. Port 22, TCP, running SSH or Secure Shell. This allows remote access with valid credentials, while generally secure, weak, or default passwords could make it vulnerable. Port 80, TCP, running HTTP on a web server. The scan indicates a basic website with no title, hosted on Apache HTTPD, which might contain web-based vulnerabilities. Port 389, TCP, running Open LDAP, a directory service protocol. The specific version may reveal potential security weaknesses. Port 636, running LDAP over SSL. However, the exact protocol could not be confirmed. These open ports serve as potential entry points into the target system. The next step is to perform a deeper enumeration of each service to uncover vulnerabilities or clues that could aid in gaining initial access or achieving shell exploitation. This analysis will inform a strategic approach to compromising the target. Next steps focus on identifying vulnerabilities to gain shell access or another foothold on the target system. Since the HTTP web server is running on port 80, we'll begin by analyzing it, as web services often serve as primary access points and can reveal additional attack vectors. Open a web browser and enter the target's IP address directly. The web page displays an image resembling Zeus, hinting at a possible exploration or reference to Greek mythology. Next, examine the page source by pressing Ctrl-U. Unfortunately, no hidden details are revealed in the source code. To locate hidden resources, we will perform directory enumeration using tools such as derb or GoBuster. These tools systematically probe for common directory and file names that are not directly visible on the website. This process helps uncover sensitive files or directories that could facilitate further exploitation. Execute the following command in the terminal to start the scan. The results reveal 3 accessible pages. Among them, /admin.php stands out as particularly interesting. This indicates the presence of a potential administrative or control panel for the website, which could provide significant control if accessed. Upon navigating to /admin.php, we discovered a login portal that could serve as an entry point. Initial attempts to log in using default credentials, such as admin or admin password, were unsuccessful. However, based on the login form's behavior and structure, the site appeared to be vulnerable to SQL injection. To confirm and exploit this vulnerability, various SQL payloads were tested while monitoring the server's responses. For example, I attempted to bypass authentication by entering the following payloads. Initially, these attempts were unsuccessful. Drawing from experience with the Symfonos 4 vulnerable virtual machine, I appended a hash mark #to the payload to comment out the rest of the SQL query. But this approach also failed. From the earlier Nmap scan, we observed that the LDAP service was running on port 389, suggesting the web service might be using LDAP for authentication. Testing for LDAP injection required crafting payloads to manipulate the LDAP query and bypass authentication. I tested a wildcard asterisk as the payload for both the username and password fields, a common technique for wildcard login testing. The payload was successful, granting access and confirming that this page served as an administrative or control panel. The header displayed navigation links labeled Home, Portraits, and Logout. The main content area showed a single message, Under Development, indicating the website was still in development and likely not fully functional. Clicking on Portraits revealed an interesting functionality. The URL suggested that the home.php script was using the URL parameter to fetch a resource, http://127.0.1/portraits.php. This behavior hinted at a possible server-side request forgery, SSRF, or local file inclusion, LFI, vulnerability, which could allow further exploitation of the target. Exploitation. We need to investigate further during the exploitation step to identify specific vulnerabilities and gain a foothold on the target system. To determine the specific vulnerability, we will modify the URL parameter to access local files. Let's start with /etc/passwd. Upon execution, the server successfully displayed the contents of the passwd file. While applications interacting with LDAP often exhibit SSRF vulnerabilities, the observed behavior strongly pointed to an LFI vulnerability in this case. To further explore accessible file paths and potentially gain a foothold on the target system, FFUF was used for brute forcing. Before proceeding, we need a cookie and a word list. Since the LFI vulnerability is being tested within a logged-in session, a valid session cookie is required. Without the cookie, we'll treat the page as inaccessible due to the lack of authentication. Open the browser's developer tools, usually by pressing F12. Navigate to the Storage or Network tab and copy the session cookie. For brute forcing, we use the clist LFI word list. but since it is not available in Kali Linux, we will download it from GitHub. We executed the following command, where -u specifies the target URL with fuzz as the placeholder brute forcing. -b provides the session cookie for authentication. -w points to the word list used for testing file paths. -c enables colored output for easier result interpretation. Initially, the output included many results, most of which were false positives. To refine this, we needed to filter the response words. To work more efficiently, we added a filter. By analyzing the initial output, we identified that standard error pages contained 117 words. To exclude these, we added the -fw flag. After filtering, the command displayed valid file paths. Inserting these paths into the URL revealed various files. However, none of the files contained valuable information. This required further analysis and strategizing to decide the next steps. Then, we will attempt to access the source code of the PHP files, as they often contain sensitive information like database usernames and passwords. Directly accessing PHP files only displayed their rendered content rather than the source code. To bypass this, a PHP wrapper method needs to be employed. The PHP wrapper encodes the content of the file in base 64, allowing access to its raw content without triggering execution on the server. This approach was used to load the source code of the PHP files. Upon execution, the server returned the base 64 encoded content of the file. However, manually copying the base 64 text was cumbersome. Instead, the curl command line tool was used to directly retrieve and save the base 64 encoded content to a local file for easier processing. The following considerations were necessary during this step. The cookie was required for authentication. Without it, access to the file was denied. The -o flag in the curl command saved the output to a file for subsequent decoding. After saving the file locally, open the file in a text editor. Now copy the base 64 encoded content. For decoding, I will use an online base 64 decoder. Let's decode it. Here, it successfully decoded the content of home.php. Upon inspecting the content of home.php, no sensitive information was found. We repeated the same process with admin.php. Upon inspecting, it revealed hard-coded LDAP credentials in its source code. The auth LDAP function contained the following credentials. These credentials allowed direct binding to the LDAP server, enabling unauthorized operations or enumeration. To enumerate LDAP, the retrieved credentials will be used to perform queries and identify critical information within the directory structure. This process can uncover valuable details such as user accounts, groups, or configurations that could aid in further exploitation. The tool used for this task is LDAP Search, a command line utility for querying and retrieving data from an LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, server. Its flexible syntax supports parameters for authentication, base DN, filters, and attributes. To begin, run LDAP Search -x, which is used for enabling simple authentication. Use -h, which is used to specify the LDAP URI. Use -d, which is used for providing the bind DN, or distinguished name. It is typically an administrative account. Use -w, which is used for supplying the bind password. And use -b, which is used for defining the base DN, which serves as the starting point for the search. The search results include the domain entry, that is, dc=Symfonos, dc=local, the admin entry with an encrypted password in the user password field, and the Zeus entry representing a user account. Attributes for the Zeus entry include UID or user ID, CN or common name, login shell, which is the shell environment, /bin/bash indicating a Unix or Linux user, home directory, which is the user's home directory, and user password, which is encrypted and base64 encoded. The user password attribute for Zeus is in the form of base64 encoded. To decode the password, run the following command. Now, we have a valid username and password, so our next step involves using these credentials to establish an SSH login attempt on the target machine to gain a foothold on the target system. Foothold. To gain an SSH connection, open the terminal and use SSH followed by the username Zeus @ then specify the target IP address. Now specify the password. The SSH login using the credentials was successful, providing access to the remote system. Upon connecting, the system fingerprint was verified and added to the known hosts file. After gaining access, the user's home directory was inspected for the user flag, but it was not present. With no user flag available, the next logical step is privilege escalation to obtain higher level access and locate the root flag. Privilege escalation. In the privilege escalation process, the primary objective is to further enumerate the system to identify misconfigurations, exploitable vulnerabilities, or overlooked permissions that could enable escalation to root or another privileged user. This includes investigating file permissions, SUID files, running services, and scheduled tasks for potential exploitation opportunities. However, as we currently operate with limited user privileges through the reverse shell, we face restrictions on accessing certain files or commands for a comprehensive assessment. To move forward, we run the sudo-l command to determine if the user, Zeus, has any special sudo privileges. The sudo-l output revealed that Zeus could execute the /usr/bin/dpkg command as root without requiring a password. This opens a path to escalate privileges and gain root access. To exploit this, the dpkg command is used to run a binary that retains elevated privileges. This binary allows access to the file system, escalates to root, or maintains privileged access. The process involves 1. Visiting the GTFOBin's website, a repository of Unix binaries that can bypass standard security restrictions to identify a suitable command for privilege escalation using dpkg. 2. Searching for dpkg on GTFOBins confirmed its ability to execute commands with elevated privileges. 3. Running sudo dpkg-l followed by injecting bang/bin/sh successfully opened a root shell. This successfully escalated privileges, switching the user to the root account. Navigating to the /root directory, the contents revealed a file named proof.txt, a common marker in CTF challenges and penetration tests, to confirm successful exploitation. To view the root flag, the cat command was executed on the proof.txt file, verifying ownership of root privileges and completing the escalation process. If you have any doubts or queries related to this video, write them in the comments section.